Greetings and welcome to the latest episode of the Small Triumph Sports Library and Archives channel. This video is a series of mostly unscripted comparisons between original and reproduction or replacement parts, specifically for the 1969 Triumph GT6 Plus, although some of it obviously applies to GT6s from other years, and a little bit of it pertains to the Spitfire Mk3. If that is of interest to you, stick around and we'll get into it on the other side. Our first segment is about this particular item for the GT6, and Triumph referred to this part as the back door hinge cover. And at first that might seem a little bit odd, because this decorative piece was doubtless not primarily designed to cover the hinges, but rather to cover the unsightly spring torsion mechanism that holds the back door up. However, if you look at the factory parts catalog carefully and go through all the different parts involved, you'll see that Triumph actually called the entire mechanism, including the hinges and the spring, they called that entire thing the hinge assembly. And so from that perspective, it makes sense that in the factory parts catalog, they would call this part simply the hinge cover. Today, enthusiasts refer to this part in a variety of different ways, but here in the US in particular, primarily as the hatch spring cover, which is the term that I use in this video. So on the original versus reproduction theme, I want to start out by talking about GT6 hatch spring covers. What you see here in the front is my original hatch spring cover from my 1969 Triumph GT6 Plus, and in the back is one of Hazen Wardle's reproduction hatch spring covers, this one with the third brake light option, and I'll talk about that in some more detail in a moment. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the hatch spring cover that is original to my car. And this is actually in quite nice shape. A lot of these get cracked, they become brittle and break. And, you know, these were not available for a long time before Hazen Wardle came to the rescue and began reproducing these. So these were pretty precious items for a while. I was fortunate in that the one in my car is actually in quite nice shape. There are no cracks in it or anything like that. Looks pretty good overall. A couple of little minor problems with it. So one thing is there is in fact a little bit of distortion on this edge right here. You can see it there. I don't know whether this was tightened down on something at one point, or if the one of the accidents the car was in caused some body distortion that might have led to that. That seems a little bit unlikely to me, but it's possible. Or if these have a tendency to warp a little bit depending on how they're tightened down. I don't know. Could be anything, but it does have a little bit of distortion there. And then beyond that, there is some green overspray on this from the crappy repairs that were done to my car back in the 70s. So right here in particular on this corner, if I can get it in the light and get it to focus, but you can probably see it's pretty green out here in particular on this outer edge. And I tried to clean it up to the best of my ability. I didn't want to use anything too harsh on it. It doesn't look too bad, but there is a good bit of green paint on here, and there's some green paint down in the grain in this corner. But under normal circumstances, that's really barely noticeable. And overall, this hatch spring cover is in good shape. And I had originally intended to use this, but then I saw Hazen Wardle's wares, and I decided that I like the idea of this third brake light option for safety. And so I decided to pick up one of his items. Now, in comparison, if I move this down and move this down as well, there are some very minor differences between the reproductions and the originals. One thing you may notice right away is that this hatch spring cover has a very matte finish to it. And interestingly, no matter how much dressing I've put on this, it always ends up, with this kind of a matte finish to it. And Hazen Wardle's reproduction, at least the one he sent to me, has a little bit of a sheen to it. It's a little bit shiny overall, which I don't think would be very noticeable within the cabin of a GT6. The texture, the graining is a little bit different. Not radically different by any stretch of the imagination, but Hazen is quite open about the fact that the grain in the reproduction is close, but not the exact same as the original. And there's some differences in appearance here because I ordered the third brake light option, so this is a kind of a redesign of the original. You can get a reproduction of this that's as close to the original as you can get, without the third brake light option, and it looks very close, and it's available in white or black. But you can also get one of these modified ones with third brake light, or there's some other options that are available too. And I don't feel the need to do a lot of work to promote Hazen's wares here. He does a great job promoting his offerings. He's done it through the Vintage Triumph register. He has done it on social media. He has a nice YouTube video, which I will link to in my video description, sort of covering the different options that are available. But it's a third brake light. There's some different functions you can get with the brake light. He also includes little flasher lights on either side of the brake light if you want that. Things like that. So there are some different options that are available. Again, I'll link to his promotional video in my video description. But here you can see original and reproduction side by side. Again, noting that this is not trying to look exactly like this because it does have the third brake light option. So that did require a bit of a redesign. But if you're interested in either a reproduction that is as faithful to this as you can get, or a reproduction that includes some additional safety features, you should definitely check with Hazen. I think these are really nice. I haven't fitted this yet, but I know a lot of people who use them. I know people who are using them, and I have a high degree of confidence that when I go to put this on my car, it is going to work well for me. That's just a quick walkthrough of this, what's available out there, and a comparison of the original to the reproduction when it comes to GT6 hatch spring covers. So our next segment is about the headlining or headliner for the GT6. Based on what I know, the GT6 Mark I had a white headliner. The 1969 GT6 Plus went to a black headliner, and then Triumph went back to a white headliner for the 1970 GT6 Plus. And that's sort of the history of the early cars. When I first got my GT6, I immediately noticed the headliner and the kind of odd pattern to it. It wasn't necessarily beautiful. It looks a little bit like a black sea with worms or snakes swimming all through it. but it had kind of an old school classic look to it that I really liked. So this is a shot of the headliner that is original to my 1969 GT6 Plus. It is black and it has a very heavy graining in it. You can see that in this image, especially at the top and the bottom of the image. And here's a close-up of the unusual pattern. It has these kind of long strands and swirls throughout it. And while some of what you see there is probably the photo being out of focus, to be honest, the headliner does look a little kind of pixelated in certain lights. Just an odd pattern. And people who are in the know when it comes to Triumph details will understand that this is the Longhorn pattern that Triumph used a great deal in the earlier years. Now, as far as I know, Newton Commercial is the only place that is producing GT6 headlining kits and distributing them to vendors. And Newton Commercial offers 3 options. They offer Longhorn, white, and black. And the Longhorn they offer seems to be only available in white. But they do offer the Longhorn pattern. Unfortunately, the white and black options that they have both have much subtler graining overall, much more kind of modern, contemporary aesthetic to them overall. But I need a new headliner. And, you know, what's available is what's available. So I went ahead and ordered a Newton Commercial headliner kit. I actually ordered it from Rimmer Brothers during a sale. And I assumed it would be a Newton Commercial kit. Rimmer Brothers actually says on their website, regardless of the color headliner you pick, it actually says that theirs are in Longhorn material. But I assumed I was going to get exactly what I saw on the Newton Commercial website, which is a different pattern from what was originally in my car. And that's what I got. So this is the black headliner that Newton Commercial is now offering. And it might be a little bit Longhornish in terms of having some kind of heavy graining, but it is not the same as the original, clearly. And I find that disappointing. It's not the end of the world. I'm okay with it, but I do think it would be great if someone was reproducing the original Longhorn grain in black for the GT6. Again, it's not necessarily the most aesthetically pleasing in appearance, but it is original and it is interesting. And as I said earlier, it does seem to have a kind of classic appearance, to me at least. This looks fine. It looks nice. It looks a little more modern. And I'm not aware of anybody reproducing Longhorn material in black. I assume it's possible to get the white one and color bond it or something like that, but that's a risk that I'm not really interested in taking. But if anyone out there is aware of the availability of the original Longhorn pattern in black, please let me know. I kind of think of Longhorn as a pattern that's trying too hard, but I kind of like it anyway. On to the next topic. All right, this segment is going to be a little bit complicated, but hopefully I can get through it without too much trouble. This segment is about the Lucas L760 type lamps that were used as rear turn signal indicators on the 1969 GT6 Plus. If you have seen any of my other episodes about my GT6 project, you may know that car came to me having been in several accidents. The back of the car was a little bashed in when I got it, and the external lamps on the rear were mostly smashed up. There were a couple that were kind of intact, or at least had some usable bits that had survived. But for the most part, the turn signal lights, the reverse lamps, and the license plate lamp were pretty beat up, out of shape. I was missing some lenses and some other bits and pieces. It was pretty bad. So early on, when I started tearing down the car and started collecting parts, one of the things that I did is I went through and ordered replacement external lamps for the rear of the car. I think I went through Roadster Factory catalog and just ordered all of those lights. It wasn't incredibly expensive, wasn't necessarily cheap either, but wasn't incredibly expensive. I ordered them, I stored them with my new parts. The originals that were smashed up were put in a storage bin early on and stored away, and I hadn't looked at them in a very long time. So these are items that really, over the last 3+ years, I hadn't thought about or paid a whole lot of attention to. Flash forward to this summer, I was visiting a club friend. I was in his workshop taking some measurements off of his GT6. He's getting toward the end of restoring his GT6 Mark I. And I was over in his workshop. I had taken some measurements. We were chatting about things. And at the end of my visit, he went into one of the cabinets in his workshop and he pulled out a new old stock Lucas lens, complete with the screws and washers. And he handed it to me and he said, I bought a number of parts from someone and this was included, and it's not appropriate for my Mark I, but I think it's appropriate for your car. And so it was red rear turn signal lens, and I took it, and it was very generous of him to give it to me, but it was a part that I really hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to, and this sort of led me into a little adventure this summer with the rear turn signal indicators. So what it did was I went and I pulled out my originals, and all I was doing was checking to make sure that the lens was correct for my car, and if it wasn't, I was going to give it back to him, or try to find a home for it if that's what he wanted me to do or whatever. And so I ended up pulling out my original rear turn signal lamps and looking at them and messing with them. And I also pulled out the replacement lamps that I had purchased. And I knew when I received the replacement turn signal lamps in particular, I didn't think they were very nice, but I looked at them briefly and I stored them away. There's more backstory here that I really have to lay out to kind of explain everything in full. So before I go further, let's get a little bit into the history of things. So I need to go through a little bit of potentially boring history of the production of the early GT6s. And let me say that I am especially focused on the U.S. market here for some of this equipment. There are different specs for different markets, but my focus is usually primarily on the U.S. market. So throughout the production of the GT6 Mark I, for the rear turn signal indicators, specifically rear turn signal indicators with red lenses, Triumph used throughout production Lucas Model 691, which you see on your screen there. So this is the lamp that Triumph used for the rear turn signal indicators on all GT6 Mark I's. For the 1969 model year, with the introduction of the GT6 Mark II/Plus, Triumph changed. And they changed to use the Lucas Model 760 type lamp for the rear turn signal indicator, again with red lenses. And this ended up being a brief change. This change made sense as a form of rationalization because this Model 760 lamp was the one that was used as the rear turn signal indicator throughout the Spitfire Mk3 run. So it made sense from that perspective. However, oddly, it seems that Triumph for the 1970 model year switched back to the Model 691 for the rear turn signal indicator. I really don't have any explanation for that or why they would do that. However, it seems to be the case. There are some vendors who seem to be unaware of this brief 1 year-ish change in production, but Spitbits, Moss Motors, and others, clearly do indicate this particular change. A real curiosity is that the change is not indicated in the Lucas Girling equipment and service parts catalogs. So both for 1968, which we might expect, but also for 1969, these catalogs indicate that the red rear flasher is Model 691. There's no mention of the 1 year-ish. Again, I don't know exactly how long the change lasted, but that changeover to the Type 760 lamp does not appear in the Lucas Girling equipment and service parts catalogs when you look at the GT6 specs. And I find that strange, but it's not to say that it's not recorded at all. If you look at the factory parts catalog for the GT6 that was issued shortly after the arrival of the GT6 Mark II/Plus, you'll see that catalog shows an illustration of the Type 691 right there. But also for the Mark II/Plus, they added the illustration of the Lucas L760, the L760 type lamp. And you can see that there. So the factory parts catalog does clearly record this change. I don't know what subsequent issues of the factory parts catalog say. Mine is from shortly after the Mark II/Plus was introduced. Here's the parts list for the 760 lamp. You can see there in the margin that it is the only lamp in the catalog that is specified for Mark II/Plus cars. It's amber lens or red lens option for different markets. Of course, the red lens was correct for the US market in 1969, but there you can see the parts list. This is what the lamps look like, and this is what I ended up with. What happened is when I realized that I needed 760 lamps, and I realized, as I'll show you in a minute, that the replacement lamps that are sold through most vendors are not even remotely correct and are kind of cheap. This summer I ended up just collecting used lamps. I collected several. I had to purchase some lenses. I ended up with several new old stock lenses for fairly reasonable prices. And then I had to look around from different vendors to try to find some boots for the wiring and things like that. So this is what I ended up with. So first of all, the plinths for the 760 are no longer made. They're not reproduced by anybody. It's not that hard to find plinths that are still in good shape, though. A lot of used plinths will clean up nicely. A lot of that old British rubber will hold up pretty well, unlike today's rubber, which seems to deteriorate very quickly. The trim rings at the top, they polished out pretty nicely. I've got a spare. I've got some that are dented and dinged that are at the bottom of the box of spares. There's the gasket, the round circular washer style gasket that goes immediately under the lamp. Those are not in great shape. They are reproduced by at least one place in the UK. So, I may end up buying some of those. It started to get pricey. Used lamps themselves are not super expensive, but when you start collecting all the other bits, you start to get in a little bit of trouble. You got the lamps themselves. The rubber boots are available from a couple of sources in the UK. I didn't find them anywhere in the United States. It's always possible I overlooked something, but I don't think they were available. Those little wiring boots, or grommets, as I think Lucas calls them. The mounting screws that go through the plinths into the body of the car are in the bag there in the center left. And then at the bottom are the lenses, new old stock lenses, as well as new old stock screws and rubber washers. And by the way, the rubber washers were a matter of curiosity to me. I had to ask around a little bit. They clearly don't go under the screw heads. They don't fit, first of all, but also I've never seen, even in period images of the cars from Triumph and elsewhere, I've never seen rubber washers under the screw heads. The consensus seemed to be, from asking around, and this is what I kind of assumed after testing things out a little bit, that the rubber washers go on. You put the screw into the lens, and then you insert the rubber washers where the screws extend out, behind the lens. And the rubber washers actually cling to the screws and keep them from falling out when you are doing maintenance on the lamps, in terms of changing the bulbs and things like that. All put together, this is what it looks like. This is a combination of new and used bits. I'm pretty happy with what I have. But let's get to why I went to all of this trouble. Why did I spend all this time collecting all of these various bits and pieces? I ended up with far more than I really needed. In fact, even with the lenses, I had the new old stock lens that my friend gave me that was in great shape. But as I was looking to purchase another lens, and I really wanted, another new old stock lens, it turned out that buying a set was just a few dollars more expensive than buying one. So I just went ahead and picked up spares. So I ended up with a lot more than I needed. And again, just sourcing some of the little bits I needed from the UK ended up costing me a fair bit of money. There is at least one new old stock complete unit 760 lamp on eBay at last check. The vendor or the seller wanted, I think, $90 for it plus shipping. That seemed outrageous to me, although by the time I collected all of these little bits and paid for shipping, that price probably doesn't seem as unreasonable to me now as it did at first blush. But anyway, so here's the problem. These are the replacement lamps that I purchased. I actually got these from the Roadster factory. It's really all that's available, especially from U.S. vendors. These are BiPAC reproductions. And I just showed you all the components of the original 760 lamp. And externally, superficially, this looks kind of similar. However, this is your lamp. It's got a plastic body. It doesn't have the bullet connector for the ground. It actually has a riveted ground right there. It's kind of fat, and it feels cheap. It may work just fine, by the way, but it feels cheap. Now, let me make a point.
So I'm going to use Moss as an example here. This is the listing for the part for the 760 lamp. You can see what it says here. And by the way, this is in the Spitfire section. So it says Mk3 rear turn signal lamp 1967 through 1969 replacement. That replacement word is very important. Not a lot of reproduction parts, even if they're inexact, will have the word replacement on it like that. So the question is, why is it there? And the reason is not simply because of this kind of very different and cheap plastic body, but something else that I discovered because I took this and I tried to insert it into an original plinth for a 760 lamp from GT6 or Spitfire, and it won't fit. This is way too fat. Might fit if you cut this whole grommet out, which I guess you could do, but this is not designed to come off. So you're having to modify things in order to make them work. Now, I mentioned that a lot of U.S. vendors, every U.S. vendor seems to have this. There's an exception. Spitbits, at last check, does have new old stock 760 lamps with amber lenses, not red lenses, but you could buy one of those and purchase a new old stock red lens and you'd be fine. I don't know how much longer they'll have stock, but Spitbits does have stock of new old stock lamps. The other thing that I wanted to mention, because these are the ones that are widely available, and I mentioned that most U.S. vendors offer these, and also there are a number of UK vendors that offer them, but the 760 lamp was also used on Land Rovers, and I did find one place in the UK, Emberton Imperial Limited, that does have reproductions of the 760 type lamp that is closer. It's metal. It looks much more like the original. I think if Moss were selling this, it would not feel compelled to explicitly describe it as a replacement. It's close enough, probably, for most people. So that is out there. That is the only place I saw a reproduction lamp like that. And that's one of just a couple of places in the UK that have some bits and bobs for the 760 lamp available. Hopefully that was of interest and or use to at least a few of you out there. If I talked about anything and missed something or made a mistake, please don't hesitate to let me know. I aim to help, but I also intend to learn. That's it for this episode. I hope to be back pretty soon with another episode. I do have another Spitfire oriented video that I've been working on for a while, but it may very well be that the next video I post revolves around offering an update on my summer work on my GT6 project. I've made real progress there, but it's a little bit depressing to me how slowly it has gone. I have definitely run into my own limitations at several points over the summer and had to learn some important lessons. But I'll get into that later. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you again soon.